Excellent. Welcome. This is awesome to speak here. This is my home city, as most of you who know me know. This is quite a tough crowd to speak to because I know half the people in the room, and that's a little bit more difficult sometimes than speaking to random strangers. So I'm Stu, this is Tash. We both work at the Photobox Group, and we're going to give you a bit of an insight into our world, really, and some of the work that we've done either at this organisation or at previous ones. It's St George's Day today for the English people in the room. I'm a Scotsman, despite the accent. I'm going head-to-head with an English woman here, so I thought I'd put that in. Does anybody really even pay attention to these pension states? I'm Irish, of course. So who am I? I started my security career at the train line. I say security, it was PCI compliance. It's not really security. And then I moved on to Skyscanner, so I guess people who know me from up here is probably because of the work I did at Skyscanner. And went to Capital One for a little while in their cyber leadership, and now I'm at Photobox working alongside Tash and numerous others. I'm a public speaker, I guess, if this is what this is. I've said this in the last few talks I've done. These things are incredibly difficult to do, so anybody who gets up and talks in front of rooms of people, I have huge respect for. Putting this content together takes time. They're nerve-wracking things to do. People who look good at it, I've got a lot of respect for them. I'm one half of Cyber Scotland Connect, and I've got a slide after this if you can indulge me for just a minute on that. I also facilitate an AWS security Slack forum, which is close to 1,000 members now. So if you're in the cloud world, as we are, and you want to learn more, then please find me on Twitter or whatever, and I'll get you a link to join that. So over to just before I go on to Tash. And so Cyber Scotland Connect is something that Harry McLaren and I put together. I don't know if Harry's in the room. Possibly not. And we've got some awesome moderators as well, of which there are a few of them here today. And we're really an establishment that's trying to bring communities in Scotland together. Regardless of what you might do or want to do or be involved in, we're trying to bring a public sector, private sector together to facilitate events and learnings and training and all sorts of other things. It's very much a work in progress, and it's being driven by this community of people. So if you want to know more, please follow us on Twitter or come and speak to us individually. That's Tash.
Cool. So I'm Tash. I work at Photobox with Stu. I recently changed roles, so I'm now leading part of our whole AppSec function, which is pretty cool. I'm also the co-lead for the London OWASP Women in AppSec chapter, which is really exciting. We had our launch event recently. If you're in London, regardless of what gender you identify with, you're more than welcome to come and support us. I'm also on the review board for DevSecCon, which is a super cool developer, security operations and engineering conference. It happens worldwide. And then I do a lot with OWASP in terms of contributing to some of their threat modeling projects and cloud security projects. I'm going to be covering a little bit more on threat modeling and the cloud security open source project a little bit later in the talk. What I'm going to do first, I'm going to hand back to Stu, who's going to kick off the first half of our journey at Photobox. And then I'm going to pick up for the second half and cover some of the engineering stuff that we've done since. So, yeah.
So I joined Photobox in May last year, so I've been there about a year. Initially to head up some security engineering work, and then really my first foray into AWS at this company was helping Moonpig, who are one of our companies, transition into AWS. I've used AWS a little bit previously, but I'm by no means an expert or anything like that. So my role kind of shifted over that period of time, and I deliberately moved my role. I wanted to move into more cloud-related things. And I think one of the most important bits about this piece of work was it was really the first time company-wide that somebody had sat with these engineering teams at the start, or as near to the start of this journey as we could get. And I've got some things that I got involved in. Security finds that notoriously difficult to really embed itself at the start of that journey. We normally come in way down the line or far further afterwards, where we have to then try and fix things or make things better. So that was the kind of main piece of work that I got involved in last year to transition into AWS. And I think one of the things that struck me fairly quickly is we're not all Netflix. We can't all be Netflix straight away. We don't all have security engineering teams of 50 people and huge budgets and huge turnovers to drive that kind of work. So you've got to start somewhere. And these were some of the things that I got involved with last summer in those areas of work from Moonpig. So well-architected reviews, so they're kind of half-day sessions with AWS in their offices, really working through the whole data flow and architectural setup of what it is you're trying to build. And they're great because you're working with the organization that you're putting your applications or data in. And security is a big part of that. And we came away from that piece of work with lots of things to look at and consider that we may not have done had security not been a part of that. I then did a lot of manual auditing of dev accounts and test accounts. Not sexy stuff, I'm afraid. I mean, lots of going into the portal and just manually looking at things and trying to find little gaps or things that I thought were wrong. This is before I got into any of the tooling or any of the cooler stuff that Tash will go on and describe. And that was really interesting. That gave me more of an insight into how some of these parts of AWS work, not being the expert in any of that. Things like setting up WAFs, or at least trying to help teams make decisions on WAFs, whether that's AWS's native product or other things on the market, and then the tooling that AWS provides, such as Guard Duty. It was really just being in that room with people to help make and facilitate decisions. We use Trusted Advisor quite a lot, so again, just making sure that was where it needed to be, and we were happy with it. The compliance-related things, again, nothing overly sexy, but helping them with PCI and making sure we were making some good decisions. And logging, this is something that comes up quite a lot around, do you have the logging for the various parts of cloud that you need to have? So, like I said, I changed my role in about August, September time deliberately. Didn't ask anybody to do it, just decided that's what I was going to do. I'm lucky enough to work for an organization that let me do that. And really didn't know where to start. So, where do you start when you've taken on a role to look after cloud security for numerous brands? And I went back to risk. What are the things that you're concerned about when you're building these technologies or hosting that data? So I went back to looking at risk. And this is nothing particularly funky, but there's lots of good things out there that can help with this. I didn't reinvent the wheel. I didn't make up these strategies. These are things that are taken from things that already exist. So things like the CIS benchmarking, NIST, ISACA, the Cloud Security Alliance, this information is out there, and go and use it if you're on a journey into the cloud or your organizations are there already. I've done a lot of looking into CIS recently, and I didn't realize there were as many benchmarking guides as there are. They're there for all sorts of things. Desktop apps, network stuff, mobile devices, not just cloud. And they're a really good set of guidelines. If you can take anything away from this particular talk, other than the cool stuff Tash does, please go and have a look at the CIS benchmarking, because they're really valuable. Or they've certainly been very, very valuable for me in the roles that I've done. So what did I do? I really just took what's in the CIS benchmarking for AWS and expanded on that with Tash's help, obviously, and some of the things we already knew as people who worked in the cloud, some of the things that we've potentially seen in the industry, or some incident response things, and tried to define 8 key areas and some of the risks that any business might have for those things. There's a list of them on my GitHub. Again, it's nothing groundbreaking. It's a starting place if you don't know where to look for cloud risk, and it'll give you, under those 8 headings, some things to think about. For those who saw this BSides Munich talk, I've added a bit to the content of this. Here we go. And these are some of the things you can think about in these areas. And this is not just defined to cloud. This could be for any network that you happen to be in, and it certainly doesn't have to just be AWS. So things like DDoS, what protection do you have? Do you have any? What layers do you have it at? Do you have layer 7 protection or just 3, 4? WAF, are you using one? The amount of organizations I know that have WAFs and don't have them in blocking mode, they're just there gathering data that probably someone doesn't look at. Logging, are you logging all the various aspects of your cloud architecture or your network architecture? And do you centralize those to help with your SOC teams or incident response teams? Keys, how are you protecting them? Are you protecting them? Are you rotating them? How many more incidents do we hear about publicly of keys in GitHub that then lead to some nasty stuff? Encryption, you'd think this was basic stuff these days in security, but it doesn't seem to be. So you can force encryption on everything in AWS to a certain extent, but you'd have to find out whether you are. S3, we're still seeing a huge amount of incidents industry-wide around open S3 buckets. Tash has got a great site, I hope I'm not stealing her content, called Grey Hat Warfare, where you can go and search public open S3 buckets for things like credentials.txt. Please don't use the creds because that's illegal. Things like IAM, which is your identity and access management in AWS. How permissive is that? Are you giving people too much permission? Are you removing it when they've left the company? Because still companies are finding that to be a real challenge. And then vulnerability management, things like using up-to-date AMIs. Now, we're a pretty agile tech business, so we're big on Jira. I know not everybody's a super fan, but we use it heavily. It's pretty much the foundation of everything that we do within the team. Anybody who sees our boss Dennis talk, he's massive on tracking things in Jira and mapping things in Jira, and a lot of it's very clever stuff. So what I did was I took those business AWS risks that I defined, got them all into Jira to link into our other existing risk management frameworks. We allocate management and technical owners and stakeholders so that we can see how all those things are mapped together, who has an input into that particular risk that we've defined. We then link those to our OKRs, which are our projects, if you like, which we call projects as well. But and it really allows us to define the pieces of work to then reduce those risks. Nothing groundbreaking. But it's all done in Jira. Everything we track is in Jira. That's our mechanism. Recently, Tash and I were in a same team together. That's moved on as companies tend to move quickly. Tash has gone to head up AppSec. But the way we work, or have been working, is extremely agile. We were working in 2-week sprints initially, where we split our OKRs into those nice manageable chunks, run them as sprints, and then we see movement on things really quickly. But we also brought other things into that workflow as well. So business as usual, requests from other areas of the business for us to do work, threat modeling or risk assessments. We brought incidents in there. So if we had an incident, it came into our sprint board. It then had a knock-on effect of other work being pushed to the sides. But that, we had a mechanism there. This is not our Jira board, by the way. It's a generic Jira board in case anyone's taking photos and I get told off. But it just gives us that mechanism to see all the work that's in flow, what's being blocked, what's been finished, and we can then show management and tell people what we've been doing. Also work requests, and we have a service desk that we use for people to create tickets. So imagine joining one company. It's easy peasy, isn't it? One company to join. Well, Tash and I fundamentally joined 4 companies because we have 4 brands that are in AWS out of the 5 brands that we have. And I think one of the main things that I've personally found quite tricky is the complexities of trying to manage cloud security across fundamentally 4 different companies. Different tech stacks, different programming languages. This crosses over into a lot of other areas of security, obviously not just cloud. How do you get things in the CI/CD pipeline when it's 4 different types of code or code bases? Even things like cultures. Some of our businesses, one in Germany, one in France. There's language barriers. These are complexities of companies that we have to think about. Things like business structures. We've got multiple CTOs, multiple heads of, and people across the leadership that we have to try and convince and sit on the right boards and sit in the right meetings to influence. One of the things I kicked off recently, which I think has been super valuable, is an AWS guild, where I bring as many of those people together in a room once a month to talk about how we align. As there are some things that we do individually as companies, but also things that have to be aligned. You've got different levels of knowledge, not just in businesses, but within teams. One of the things I guess we've found from some of the brands here is lots of different accounts across AWS, development environments, production environments, Terraform versus CloudFormation for your infrastructure as code. Again, these have been different across these brands, and it's hard to find where that common ground might be. So lots of complexities of trying to embed what we're doing across these brands. Now, don't shout out if you've seen this already. What's the most important aspect of securing the cloud? Anybody want to be brave enough to shout something out? Yeah, go for it, Sean. Sorry. No, I mean, what's the most important aspect of securing that, though? So, yes, technically it is public cloud, but there's not a right answer to this, by the way. This is just this is my experience of. I'll put you out of your misery. So it's recruitment for me. I think recruitment is probably the most important part of the roles that I've been doing over the last few years, because if I don't have awesome people who can help me do the work that I think we need to do, that work doesn't get done. So you can have all the cool tooling, you can try and get to where Netflix are, and want to automate everything and get into this kind of cool compliance as code world. But if you don't have people with you to go on that journey, you're never going to get there. So to me, that continues to be the most important thing. And I would echo this for the whole industry, not just anything cloud related. Recruit great people into your organization, give them a chance to learn, and they'll be the people that get you where you need to be. So what have I learned? It's been a pretty crazy 6, 7, 8 months in a crazy tech business. I guess your journey has to start somewhere, right? Whether you're building a security team from scratch or you're doing something in our world for cloud or AWS. Changing businesses takes real time and graft. It is a lot of effort. It's a lot of speaking to people, spending time on the ground with teams, lots of investment in just speaking to people. And it's painful, no doubt about it. Trying to get those major stakeholders around the table, that's difficult as well. That guild that I talked about, that's a commitment in time for some of the most senior people in the business who are, very difficult to find time in their diaries. But it's been super valuable to get chat and conversation moving. People repeat mistakes. I'm no different, and we're trying to find ways to make that better. Cloud, it's complex, it's difficult. It's okay to admit that it's difficult. I think security as a whole is difficult, and there's lots to learn. And recruitment is key, right? So that's my kind of takeaway from this. Just that to leave you with. One more slide after this. This is me most days of my career. And I'm more comfortable with putting this out there and saying this to people. People who know me personally know the imposter syndrome thing. But this is a lot of days in my career where I don't really know the right way to go, but I'm trying things, I'm trying to research things and trying to learn from other people either in my organization or people like yourselves in the room. So it's okay to admit that. And I think we should get more comfortable with that part of security. It's a vast field that we're trying to learn about. And just some things that have helped. Other training platforms are available. This is not a sales pitch to any of these things. A cloud guru at the moment for me, I'm investing a lot of time in learning via that platform. Cybery is really good because it's free. So if you want something where you don't have to pay for. I watch loads of talks on YouTube. I don't get any strategic ideas. I don't just sit and they come out of nowhere. I watch talks from people in organizations that fix these problems. And then I try and work some of that into places that I work. I'd like to say it was all my idea, but it's really not. It's people on YouTube. SlideShare. So coming to see these kind of talks or any talks is really valuable. You'll take some things from it and other things maybe less so. But the fact that people are willing to do it, put it all out on YouTube, and these are all recorded, these talks, and SlideShare, you can go and research some really, really cool people in the industry who will help you in the roles that you end up in. So I guess that's my bit of the talk, and I'll pass over to Tash for her insight into her world.
Cool. So Cyberary is actually one of my favourite resources. One, because it is free, but actually there's some really great content on there. And with SlideShare, I used to play a game. It's such a weird game. I'm such a nerd. With friends called SlideShare Karaoke. I don't know if anyone knows what SlideShare Karaoke is. It's quite often a game that happens at hackathons at like 2 a.m. when you need to get away from what you're building. But the idea is that you also, you basically get a random slide deck from SlideShare and you have to present it to the group. I've had some really weird ones. I had to present once on cloud, but not our cloud, like Nimbus cloud. And that was, I was lucky mine was quite safe, whereas someone else had to present one that was definitely not safe for work. So it's good fun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover off some of the things that help to build on top of a lot of those foundations that Stu talked about to start to kind of progress towards some real technical changes and how we are starting to enable that. We are by no means a fully DevSecOps organization that has got everything right, but we're really on a journey. Some of the things that I'm going to cover actually Sean has done a really good job of almost laying some of the entry to those areas, and I'm going to dive into from a slightly different perspective. So they should complement each other quite well. It's worth noting this isn't everything. I'm also quite active on Twitter, and if you are interested in when Stu talked about the OKRs and our kind of the way we use Jira, I posted a taxonomy a couple of days ago on Twitter where I talked about how I create tasks and derive those from objectives and business priorities. So these are some of the things that I'm going to talk about. The first thing I want to kind of cover off is it's a level of empathy, really, right? Which is there's this idea that as security people, we cover so many different aspects of security. But as software engineers, they've gone from being software engineers to all of a sudden being full stack in the cloud, right? They're covering infrastructure engineering. They're writing Terraform, CloudFormation, whatever, to deploy databases and servers. They become DBAs, database admins. So they've gone from this one role of running their one thing to all of a sudden having to carry all of these responsibilities at once. And I think one of the things that we can do to make it easier, beyond all of these technical things that we're going to talk about, all these processes and resources, is the level of empathy for engineers. We've, as security people, I think have always had it pretty tough in having to cover all these different things. For engineers, it's a real learning curve. And in the organizations that I've worked at least, I've seen hardly anyone really sit engineers down and say, here's a 101 on being a DBA, or here's a 101 on infrastructure administration or infrastructure deployment. And I think that a level of empathy will go a long way in building those relationships with your teams. So beyond that, I want to introduce my cloud security pyramid scheme. I've been warned about this slide a couple of times. I once talked about my pyramid scheme in the US, so I called it my Ponzi scheme, and someone took quite a lot of offense to it. It's very illegal, but not necessarily the way we do it. So this is my Security Champions program. The idea is that we don't scale as security people, so we want to use our engineers to be our eyes and ears, or Sean talks about our effectively our middleman in those teams, so a way to be a conduit between us and our engineering teams. I call it my pyramid scheme. The idea is I can sit quite comfortably at the top with Stu, and I can use those engineers to then talk to more and more people and to spread that message for me. I'm not going to go too much into this because some of you would have seen it in Sean's talk, but I do a lot around gamification, training and resources, empowerment. One of the things that I'm really pushing is for security champions to be part of our team's objectives. That way, when they are hosting, whether they're hosting training for their colleagues or they're coming along to training or they're coming to conferences, it's something they can talk about at their end of year or in their recaps with their line management, and it's something that can hopefully help them progress in their career. We're still very much on a learning curve as security champions. When I joined Photobox, there were a lot of people that had been voluntold to be a security champion. So rather than volunteering for the program, someone had just shoved them forward and said, you do it now. And you'll see a real difference when that happens in the engagement level. So we work really hard to make it a rewarding thing for people to be a part of, and being part of their objectives, I'm hoping will go a long way. We're also working on providing a lot of feedback, talking to line managers, and really encouraging people to be a part of it. Some of the things that we're looking at doing are hosting things like capture the flag events, where we use things like OS Top 10, and we get our security champions in a room and we get them to try and break into these websites, try and find some flags. And the idea is to reaffirm the things that we're talking about by actually practically doing something, to gamify it, make it exciting and interesting for them. So there's a whole load of different stuff on there. The one thing I kind of mentioned before is it doesn't always go right. It's about iterating, being able to change your program. One thing that works in one company might not work in another. I came from financial services with a very largely distributed organization across the US and the UK. And they have multiple American and Canadian offices. And what we found with the Security Champions program there is we couldn't have one singular program. We almost had to have like factions across the different areas. And they had some common goals, but they were mostly autonomous. Whereas at Photobox, even though we've got multiple brands and we've got 5 in total, we found that it's much easier to have that one program because of the way the organization is set up. So the other thing that I've been doing a lot of, and for those that follow me on Twitter or have seen me at other talks, this is my thing. I love talking about threat modeling. It's something we already do, even if you don't know about it. If you think about parking your car in a weird dark alley, you're already thinking about the things that can go wrong. One of my favorite stories on this is I like to say that my husband should do a little bit more threat modeling. When he wanted to propose to me, we were flying to South Africa. And he had the ring in his pocket, and we're going through airport security. And he was like getting really nervous and a bit intense. And he's like, oh, and I'm like, just relax. Like, it's just London airport security. It's not like they're going to go right up in there or anything. just chill out a little bit. And he was like, oh, no, I'm really excited to go on holiday. And I'm like, all right. I didn't realize he had a ring in his pocket. And as we got up to the airport security and they're really patting people down, he looks at me and he says, I'll race you. I am really competitive. I'd like to say it's a strength, but more often than not, I will push people out of my way to get somewhere. So he says he'll race me at airport security, and the first thing I do is I look at him, I leave him some bags, and I just walk kind of as fast, but like also not so fast to draw attention to myself, away from him in airport security, just so I can get through. And I get through to the other side, and I'm like there 10 minutes before he is. I've made sure I picked the right queues. There was no one with prams in front of me, or old people, or anyone that would slow me down, because I have no empathy when I'm in a competition. And I get through, and I'm like, yes, I did it. And he gets through the other side, and he's like sweating. He's like, yeah, I'm okay. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? I found out a couple of days later when he proposed successfully at the time and place that he'd decided he was going to do it, rather than at airport security. But one of the things that struck me was he hadn't really thought about some of the things that could go wrong. It wasn't a natural thing for him. Whereas I think in security, it's really easy for us to constantly be thinking about, okay, what can go wrong and how will that go wrong and what can I do to mitigate that? What can I do to get around it? And now I felt for him because he wasn't about to put the ring in the suitcase because I packed it, as we do. But it was an interesting challenge. And I think when I start to talk about threat modeling with engineering teams, the thing I start to think about is think about the value, the reason you're doing what you do. Engineering teams aren't always told, you're building this for optimization or to fix reliability or to make it more secure. That's not what gets product owners going. It's about features and value. So what I start to do is change that conversation, which is rather than always thinking about what can go wrong from a security perspective, is what removes the value of what you're doing. So what takes that value away? And then it becomes a much easier conversation. One of the things that I've been playing around with is how we take that threat modeling and that traditional kind of long process of going through these 4 questions, which is one of many methodologies. It's just the one that I prefer, and fitting that into the software development lifecycle. So when we've got teams working at agile methodologies and they're doing sprint planning or stand-ups, they don't really have time for a long threat modeling session. So we've been playing around with how we break this down so that when teams are in a stand-up and they're talking about a new feature they're going to start working on, they can quickly go around as a group and say, what removes the value of that? What would stop that working the way I want it to work? It's still something we're trialing at the moment, and I'm going to show you in a couple of slides one of my new tools that I've been working on that I'm hoping to release open source in a couple of weeks, that I'm using to make this process a little bit easier for cloud environments. I mean, these are the 4 questions I work through when I do a threat model. They're really simple, but again, when I'm short on time or when I'm struggling to get that message with teams, I go back to what would remove the value of what you're doing. That's based on a methodology by a guy called A.V. Douglin, who is the OWASP Tel Aviv chapter lead. And he's also really active on Twitter and the OWASP Slack, which if you want to link to at the end, let me know and I'll hook you up. So the next thing I want to talk about, and this is my other favorite, is security tests, which Sean also spoke about. My challenge is no one reads our security policies, right? Even if you have them, and let's be realistic, some companies don't even have security policies. Or security standards, is when people do write them, they seem to just buy these bulk standards and then just throw them at their engineers. And they end up with these 45-page documents with really complex wording in them. That might not even be completely relevant to what you're doing. And what I found in a couple of companies that I worked at is that no one is reading them. And realistically, no one cares. So I've been looking at writing tests. I've been trying some of the stuff that Sean talked about as well, which is writing really short tests, things like quick regular expressions that will check they're not about to commit GitHub keys to AWS keys to GitHub, which we've seen a lot of companies do a lot of times. So the other thing I've been working on and with the Cloud Security OS project are BDD tests. So this is behavior-driven development, and the idea is that we're writing security tests in human-readable language. So your product owners, your risk managers, your PCI guy, whoever that is, or whatever your kind of compliance team looks like, can contribute to these types of tests. And then we have a Python library that effectively converts that. And that's one of the things I'm working on at the moment, is how I create that library to then apply this to Terraform scripts or CloudFormation scripts. So rather than using it with CLI tools to look at what's currently deployed in your cloud infrastructure, how can I embed this into the SDLC so that, hopefully our teams are interested in reading your security policies, but realistically, if we're being honest, they're not. So how do I automate that? My other kind of favorite idea from this is when you come to PCI certification, you don't actually have to do a whole lot of talking to auditors. You can just run through the SDLCs, just run through your pipeline. Hopefully everything will pass. But you can generate some quantifiable documentation that attests to your PCI status or your security status. Obviously, that's a long-term goal. We're by no means fully automating that. But it's something that I'm really, really passionate about at the moment. My other kind of idea is to take some of our security standards, things like OWASP Top 10, the OWASP Serverless Top 10, and start to write those as tests as well. So the other piece is around elevation of privilege card games. This is one of the ways that I support my threat models, and this comes back to that gamifying with security champions and with engineering teams. The elevation of privilege cards is an open source toolset from Microsoft. You can find it on GitHub, and I'll have a list of all the resources that I've covered at the end. And these are a card deck, I think it's quite 75 or 80 odd cards in there that have kind of sample threats against your infrastructure. Now, these cards have been around for a really long time. They are very good, but again, some of the language and some of the tool sets and the tech stack that it talks about are, we know technology moves really fast, right? So some of them are, unfortunately, a little bit vintage. I used to work at Apple, and anything older than 5 years was considered vintage Apple, and that started to hurt me a little bit. I unfortunately use that to describe some of the cards in this deck. However, it's still an incredibly useful tool. And it's something I found really interesting with teams. You can gamify it. So there is an actual game where you can play threats against their designs or their infrastructure, and you can pull out these threats. It is hard when you're doing a threat model using something like this, because these teams, they work on this product for a long time, or they've just got this design and they've got this brand new idea, and you're effectively bringing them into a room and you're kind of kicking the crap out of their child they've just built and they've invested all this time into. But actually, the more you frame it and you kind of talk about it as being a muscle that needs to be exercised and built up, it gets to become a really engaging and really interesting team building exercise with your engineers. So I decided to take this a bit further because teams really responded to having these cards in threat models, and Fraser Scott, who we work with on the OWASP Cloud project, he built an Alexa skill for this too. So you can say, hey Alexa, give me an elevation of privilege threat. So I started to evolve this to take it a bit further to kind of bring a little bit more relevance back to what our teams are doing. And I started to work on these cloud security cards. They're not launched yet. I'm quite excited about it, as you can tell. And I really wanted to work in a Star Trek GIF because I see way too many Star Wars stuff at these events, and I'm a full-on Trekkie. So these are the cloudy cards. So these are hopefully going to be open source soon, providing I can actually finish working on them. So if you want to contribute, you're more than welcome. And these are taking a lot of the threats that we see in the wild, the ones in the news, but also some of the stuff that we've seen from various companies, and I've got an AWS TAN support in as well. And what I've done is I've tried to rewrite these as some threats against the environment. The idea is, as a team, you can either play the full game or you can just grab some cards and you can look at your design, or you can look at what you're building or even what you've already built at any stage in the SDLC. And you can start to play these cards against it, or you can read through them as you're kind of thinking about the feature that you want to work on, with the idea if it can help guide and give you a bit more information about what it is you're building. My aim as a AppSec team of one, soon to be two, is that a lot of the questions that we get from teams can be answered either through automation or through good tooling or support, so that I can spend more time on the more niche questions, the designs, the architecture advice. I want to get to a point where we can start giving advice to teams when they say, hey, I've got this crazy new language I want to work in, and say, actually, that's great, I've already been thinking about that. And I want to be able to shift the focus we've got on firefighting to that kind of more proactive defense. And cards like this are a good way of putting that into teams' own hands to own their security and the threat assessment of the project they're working on. So that's the cloudy cards, hopefully coming soon. So here is a rundown of some of my favorite tools that I've been using. So some of that I haven't talked about here, but have been incredibly helpful as both in my last company and as I joined Photobox, which I've been for about 3 months now. Cloud Custodian is a serverless, automated, I guess, threat and security configuration detection tool, but you can use it prevention too. I always think Cloud Custodian gets a bit snarky because you can configure it so it just sends you an email and says, hey, by the way, your S3 bucket isn't encrypted. Or you can configure it so it says, hey, by the way, your S3 bucket isn't encrypted, so I deleted it. and everything inside it. And you can do some really cool stuff with Cloud Custodian to kind of make it a little bit more preventative. And one of the things that I've been looking at is when I look at my AWS estate and I go through from non-production environment all the way through to PCI workloads, it's how I slightly change the configuration of those tools for Cloud Custodian to get like more and more snarky as you kind of move up that compliance scale and that production scale. I've got a Security Monkey on there. I've got an asterisk. Security Monkey is a Netflix tool. Hands up if anyone's ever configured a Netflix security tool. Yeah, it was really awful. I'm trying not to swear too much, but my God, it was the worst thing I've ever had to configure in my life. And Netflix makes some really great tools. They make some awful documentation. And they also do some really niche things like never update their tool set. So a lot of their dependencies will be updated over time, but their tool set isn't, and they don't pin any versions. I mean, you shouldn't really from a security perspective. So it's kind of ironic. Security Monkey actually has a lot of vulnerable dependencies, which they've not addressed, and that's really annoying. It's a good tool for kind of looking at the security configuration of your estate, but my goodness, hard work. So yeah, there's some really interesting ones there. Prowler, I think I've got on there. Yeah, Prowler, Scout Suite are again some free open source tools. So all of these are open source, by the way. That's a really kind of big piece for me at these conferences is very interesting introducing tools. I'd love to kind of be able to push the open source ones where I can. So Prowler and Scout Suite again are tools that you can use with the AWS CLI to scan your infrastructure and look for vulnerabilities in security configuration. And then the Cloud Security OS project at the end, which are those BDD automated tests. The Cloudy cards don't have an official project at the moment. I'm still trying to work out the best way to do those under Creative Commons, but they will be open source. They will be soon. Your best bet is to follow me on Twitter, shameless plug, at Tash Norris, or at Hirst InfoSec. Yep. And you'll be able to get some info of those as soon as they go live, or just to say, hey, I'd love to contribute to the project. Those are my favorite tools. There's a QR code here for the AWS Security Slack forum. The biggest piece that I would love to leave you guys with is there's a lot of stuff that I've not talked about on here and you'll be thinking, oh, but that's really key. That's something that I love and that's something I use. Or your kind of biggest security tip, it would be to contribute back to the community. Whether it's OWASP or BSides or other initiatives, there's also the Many Hats Club. Come and ask me about it if it's something that interests you. Would be to contribute back, whether it's blog posts, blogs, videos, speaking. We're always looking for people to open source and release the projects and the stuff they're working on. That's it. Any questions? I will take one question.
So there's a lot of great content there about enabling like cloud environments and like to make them compliant and to make them truly secure. But would you say enable like securing AWS and like cloud environments, is that easier than on-prem, do you think? Like with all these tools and with all these like great like Amazon services, does it get easier or is it still just as, if not more difficult?
That's a good question. I think it's more visible. I think your security vulnerabilities and what you can do about them is way more obvious or clearer. In some ways, I think it's a lot harder because you go from an on-premise, things aren't exposed by default. You've got like that additional layer in terms of your domain, your network segregation. Whereas in AWS, to make things super easy for people who use cloud, AWS does this really cool thing where they make everything public by default, which really, really annoys me. So yeah, my personal perspective is it's harder in a way, but it's more visible. So I feel like it's easier to tell what you should go after first. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I mean, I would echo what I sort of said in some of those slides about recruitment. I'm finding cloud security recruitment harder than security recruitment.
Sure.
I'm really lucky to work alongside Tash to join Thoughtbox because I've learned a huge amount. But I'm under no illusion that there aren't a huge amount of people with that level of knowledge at this point in their careers. So finding that talent to come in and help you on that journey is difficult. Like I said, you've got to start somewhere. So even if it's learning yourself, would I say AWS is harder to secure? Yeah, only from that knowledge point of view, as opposed to
sure.
as a thing. It's just a network. It's somebody else's data set.
Yeah.
A lot of the premises are the same. recruitment, getting people in to help you has been difficult.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Really good talk. I've used AWS heavily and used the WAF aspects of it to secure, because WAF only plugs into a load balancer or CDN. Basically, if you use the top OAups, you could buy one from like Sophos and stuff, which don't tell the rules they use, which is really easy to bypass. I've done a demo on it, but also, are you guys personally, for example, maybe I don't know if you could share that or not, do you guys use any third party like Palo Alto in the WAF section and marketplace in AWS, or do you guys just use custom, use the basically the top ops free version and you just add your own queries into it? Because I know if you use like Palo Alto, it could be very expensive because it scales out if you're attacked by some DDoS or something. And if you have like, I don't know, 30 instances of Palo Alto running, it could cost you like a lot of money. So just a question of how you guys utilizing the WAF.
So first off, it's going to be quite difficult to talk about specifics of what company are using, what they're doing. I'd happily have a private conversation with you afterwards and give you a bit more clarity, but this is going out on YouTube stuff. I think from what I've seen of the custom rule sets which you can buy on Marketplace, you can't configure them, and a lot of the times you can't see what it is that they're doing, so you're taking a bit of a punt that it is doing what you hope that it's doing. I think that's why WAFs are particularly difficult, because you want that configurability and to see what it's doing. I'm not convinced that the Marketplace rules give you that. So probably I can say on that.
From previous experience and from some of the stuff I've seen it through my colleagues and through AWS, there's still a challenge for some of the WAF companies to really embrace cloud and serverless, especially. So you'll see a lot that say, we're embedded in the AMI. And you're like, that's great, I don't have any. So there's still a challenge in things like auto-scaling, license releasing. If you terminate an instance and reboot an instance, some of them take 30 minutes to release a license, which is not viable in the cloud. Some are making a real journey. Sean talked about mod security. I spent a lot of time helping with one of the open source projects for that, but the overhead was insane. And any company I know that uses mod security have full-time people on their WAF ops team just on rule configuration, which is mad to me. So it's probably better to catch up with Stu. A couple of tips on the threat modeling piece of using WAF: make sure your endpoints are covered, make sure you know how to turn a rule off if you're getting a lot of false positives, because you'll just really piss off marketing teams. And just absolutely validate that they are able to do things like scaling and license releasing and stuff like that. You're making him work for it.
Hey, great talk. So I guess cloud in itself has been out for a while now. Have we seen some maturity evolve around security in that? Are things improving?
I've not set myself up for it. I would love to do a demo with Grey Hat Warfare. So next time, I would go to, I think it's greyhat.warfare.com, totally legal website, totally legal. What you do next is up to you. Search credentials.csv. For those of you who are familiar with AWS, you'll know that that is the credential file you get to generate AWS access key and user keys, secret keys. You see how many results there are. I think it's a lot. I think you get about 4 million buckets back. And they all have, some of those are delete files that have just been cached by CloudFront, but some of them are valid credentials that are valid for AWS environments. Not that I've tried. Always get permission before you try these credentials if they don't belong to you. So, no. I think we're still seeing a lot of public buckets. I think a lot of people relying on obscure URLs to protect public objects. This Grey Hat Warfare site, which is open source, will show you that that's absolutely not true. I think that there are so many simple mistakes to make that a lot of the really cool security innovation security architecture and these things like zero trust networks that people are invested in is being lost through overly permissive IAM policies and open S3 buckets. And it comes back to that when we moved to the cloud and we had these kind of on-premise infrastructure that was not really easy to secure, but easier in a way. When we moved to the cloud, there was a lot of default open by default, and that's just made things way more of a pain. I think it's going to take a while, and I think it really involves vendors making massive changes to their default configuration to get rid of some of these simple vulnerabilities. Then I think we'll see the attack vector change. In the cloudy clouds, you'll see one around CloudFront subdomain takeovers, which is a really niche, newer attack that AWS actually recently fixed. That was a really cool one. It was really easy using CNAME's configuration to overtake other people's websites by just spinning up a CloudFront instance service. So there are some really cool niche attacks coming out, but I don't think they're really maturing.
Yeah, I mean, is it getting better? No, it's getting worse because more organisations are going into the cloud. But is there more information out there? Yes, I mean, there's more companies fixing those problems. So it means there's more places for people like me to go to get an idea of what the hell to do. But I think you'll see it continue to get worse. It's just a microcosm of the rest of the security industry for me, where more companies are starting to have to invest in these things, and cloud will be no different because every organisation will be leveraging it at some point. Trust me, if you think your organisation isn't or won't, it will, because it's unavoidable, then it'll just come with further complexities.
Thank you very much.
Can I just a shameless plug, but Tash is back in Edinburgh towards the end of May at WoodMac for the Cyber Scotland Connect event, so if you want to hear her again, please come on to that.
Oh yeah, but
sorry, BSides.
About modelling minority report mashup, also the chat report. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.